now request Professor Dr. Dilip Uke, Vice Chancellor MNLU Mumbai, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Honorable Vice Chancellor of CMR University, Dr. Shivakumar, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Registrar, my friend and former Vice Chancellor of Law University, Karnataka State Law University, now Dean of School of Legal Studies, CMR University, Professor Subramania. My another colleague from Pune Symbiosis Law School, Director and Dean, Professor Shashikala Gurpur Madam. Another colleague from another Symbiosis Law School, Hyderabad, Professor Sarfraz. Rather, I am sandwiched in between two Symbiosises, Pune and Hyderabad. All the faculty members of CMR School of Legal Studies, delegates and dear student friends. It's indeed a great pleasure and privilege to be here in this finest morning to be with all of you on the occasion of this national seminar on recent trends in constitutional law. I beg your pardon before I say anything because I have to rush to the airport. Hence, I would like to confine to one particular area because the area which has been chosen is an ocean. If one decides to navigate in that ocean, even a day is not enough one. Hence, I wish to confine only to the particular area, that is the notion of gender justice and present trends in constitution. Because I believe that today is the 2nd March. On 8th March, we will have International Women's Day to be celebrated. In advance, very in advance, I wish all of you, including the guys, a very happy International Women's Day as such. When we talk about gender justice, I do say that the history of gender justice is the history of mankind, and search for some higher moral ideals as well as the contours, content and context, as well as parameters which have been ingrained, provided either under international law or municipal legislations, and before that even the constitution. Since we are talking about the recent trends in constitutional law, let us look at what is contained in the preamble of the constitution. Dear friends, all of us know well, rather in Maharashtra, recently on 26 January, the government has issued the circular to all the colleges, all the universities, to read out the preamble of the Constitution. Being the member of this liberal civilized society and the citizen of this so-called great country, as well as the lawyer, we ought to know it is not only the supreme law of the land, but rather it is a kind of a scripture of humanity. As Constitution says, as the preamble of the Constitution says that we the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and an opportunity, and to promote amongst them all of fraternity, assuring the dignity of individuals and unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, on this 26th day of November 1949, we do hereby adopt, enact and give ourselves this Constitution. This is what the preamble of the Constitution is all about. Now I do not wish to go in all the details that what is meant by each of those concepts: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. But I would like to read in between these concepts. And these are not only the mere concepts. Similarly, the notion of justice, when we say social, economic and political, it also contains the notion of gender justice. And then the fraternity. the notion of fraternity, equality of status and an opportunity, and fraternity particularly assuring the dignity, a human dignity of all individuals. I hope you can gather something, you can get something, what I mean, what I intend to convey, what I intend to say as. We look at the Constituent Assembly debates which took place then. It is not merely formalized, constructed, but rather with at great length each word was debated. Just for the sake of your information, when the issue of fraternity came, what is meant fraternity? It is a kind of a common brotherhood, common sisterhood. So fraternity assuring the dignity of individuals and unity of nation. Then there was no such word integrity. Originally, it was only dignity of individuals. Fraternity assuring the dignity of individual and unity of the nation. No word of integrity of the nation was there. The members of the drafting committee led by Sir Pattabi Sitaramaiah wanted that the unity of the nation shall come first and then dignity of individuals shall come later. Whereas when they presented this memorandum, it was countered by Sir B.N. Rao, an advisor of the Constituent Assembly, and the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Their argument was that unless initially, firstly, the dignity of individuals is not assured, there is a question of unity of the nation. Thereby, what is more important is the dignity of individuals. If dignity of individual is secured, it will yield to unity of nation. And that's why it was retained. Try to understand this. The hierarchy, order is also so significant, is so important, that why the dignity of individuals has been given a primacy over the unity of the nation. When we say dignity of individuals, including womanhood, including women, and that's what rather the notion of gender justice is all about. Similarly, all those fivefold concepts, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic, as I said that due to the time constraint rather, Subramania sir, I wish to come once again for independent, different lecture, if at all permissible, convenient to both of us. And I wish to trouble them, torture them for a while. As democracy we know, Abraham Lincoln's definition we know. Democracy is what? It is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That's what the definition of democracy, which has been known universally, has been accepted universally. We do not know whether the words, spellings of the words have undergone a change. Government is by, BYE, for, FAR, and of, OFF. Though it appears in a lighter vein, think over seriously. I call upon all of you, think over it seriously. Whether it is really so or not. That is one. Secondly, the chairman of the drafting committee, Dr. Ambedkar, he did not accept that definition. He came out with his own definition of democracy, particularly for India. Because as the great jurist, Hugo Grotius, international law lawyer, principle of pacta and servanda, who has initiated, who said at the same time that constitution of, he is also a social contractorian. Hugo Grotius, a great jurist, a natural law lawyer, who also had talked about social contract. In his social contract, he said that, Hugo Grotius, constitution of each country has been preceded by the social contract, and people have adopted the constitution depending upon their political, social, economic circumstances existing then at the time of its making. That's why the word is we the people. Contract reached by the people, amongst them. We the people of India having solemnly resolved to constitute India into sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. That's what he said. Constitution of each state has been preceded by the social contract by the people. So whatever is there in the preamble, whatever the constitution is, it is the product of the social contract entered by the people amongst themselves. That's what lastly it said, and to give unto ourselves this constitution, preamble. That is a replica of, reflection of the social contract reached by the Indian people then and thereby. The notion of democracy, which is relevant here, the notion of constitutionalism, which is necessary here, the notion of transformative constitutionalism, which is necessary here, and mixing all because of the constraint of time. That, according to him, according to Dr. Ambedkar, democracy is not that what Abraham Lincoln said, but for him, he came out with his own definition of democracy. And for him, democracy is the form and method of government. Democracy is the form and method of government whereby revolutionary changes in economic and social lives of people to be brought without any bloodshed. Ponder about this. Think over this. According to him, the definition of democracy or democracy is nothing but the form and method of the government whereby revolutionary changes in social and economic life of people could be brought without any bloodshed. That's what the real meaning, real content, real context of democracy is all about. Democracy, rule of law, constitutionalism, and now transformative constitutionalism together constitute the core, soul of the Indian Constitution as well as Constitution. And therefore, it is necessary to know, it is necessary to understand that the Trinity, justice, liberty, and I know that many of you would say equality, no, fraternity. That's why he talked about not only political democracy, but at the same time, or more importantly, the social democracy. You read, you go through those Constituent Assembly debates. Political democracy is different. And social democracy, according to him, is that which recognizes. Social democracy is that which recognizes liberty, justice, and fraternity of every individual or creature. That is what the social democracy is. He went further and observed that unless there is a social democracy exists in a particular society, in any society, political democracy would not survive as such. The trinity of values, justice, liberty, and fraternity. Now the question is, it is a high time to introspect. Do we have that kind of fraternity? Do we have that common brotherhood, common sisterhood? When we talk about recent trends, and as I said, I will confine myself with the notion of gender justice. More than 50% or 50% of the population of this country, we call it, unfortunately, a weaker sex. Why? Where is that social democracy? Does it exist? It is time, really a high time to know. Is there equality of status and opportunity to womanhood? Is there a real women's empowerment? Why these discriminations? Why these abuses? Why these violences against women? Dowry deaths occur every time. Bride burning occurs every time. Female criticides occur every time. Even the laws, as the feminism or feminist jurisprudence says that legal system is patriarchal one. Laws in the legal system are patriarchal one. Society is male dominated one. Even judiciary is male dominated one. And thereby the laws declared by the Supreme Court are also patriarchal one. One need to think over this. Therefore, a notion of gender justice which is based upon the feminist jurisprudence which has been evolved, advocated by great jurist, feminist jurist Catherine MacKinnon, Susan Miller-O'Keefe and others, and in India, Professor Ratna Kapoor. As Catherine MacKinnon says, Professor Catherine MacKinnon says, rather first time in 1981 she had published the article in Harvard Law School towards feminism, and therefrom the idea came up. Feminism is like a house having so many rooms. The issues in relation to women, economic, social, political, cultural, religious, ethical, moral, so on and so forth. Because the position of women is secondary one, subordinated one. And that's why, to challenge that, to challenge the society, to challenge the patriarchal order which exists in the society, to challenge the legal system which is patriarchal one, to challenge the laws in the legal system which are patriarchal one. I will give one instance for that. And to take out the measures how to transform, how to change this, and to really deliver justice to 50% of womanhood, to 50% of human beings. We talk about human rights. Are women are not human? See, you are aware that even till now 50% reservation or 30% reservation to women in parliament or legislature, it is not yet been materialized. Why is it so? Every political party promises before the election. There were attempts also made. And that's why it is necessary for each member of this civilized society. That as the feminists say that laws are patriarchal one, legal system is patriarchal one, even the constitution is patriarchal one. There are different versions of feminism. Liberal is there, radical is there, cultural is there, and postmodern is there. I do not wish to go in details about that. Why they need a special protection like 15.3, Article 15.3 of the Constitution, when they are at par with? According to them, they shall be treated at par. Equality is similarity, not a special one. Of course, many of them, some of them do not believe in that school of thought. And therefore, all of you are aware probably about the judgment delivered by the Supreme Court in Vishaka vs. Rajasthan in the year 1997. Freedom from sexual harassment, particularly at workplace. There was no law then. Supreme Court came out. Supreme Court had invoked special provision under Article 142 of the Constitution. Article 142 confers the power upon the Supreme Court to pass any order in a matter pending before it to do, dear friends, to do complete justice. Complete justice, a gender justice. It confers the power upon the Supreme Court to pass any order in a matter pending before it to do complete justice. That's what I said. History of gender justice is the history of mankind and search for an absolute justice. Its content, its contours and context, their parameters. Wherein, having invoked that power under Article 142, Supreme Court has laid down then certain guidelines. Two things very important. One was CEDAW, a convention on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, was invoked by the Supreme Court. International law experts are here. They will tell you. Unless there is a municipal legislation, we cannot follow international law. Whereas in this case, international law was followed without having a municipal legislation. Supreme Court laid down those guidelines for prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. Declared those guidelines as binding. Otherwise also, a law declared by, not the judgment, decision delivered by. According to Article 141, law declared by the Supreme Court shall be binding upon all the courts within the territory of India. And not only upon the courts, not only upon the parties, even upon the administration. Administration has to be carried out in accordance with the law, in accordance with the decision delivered by the Supreme Court. That is the law, higher, superior, than not only any statute, even than the Constitution has. There are several such instances. So those guidelines were made mandatory, binding. It was the first time Supreme Court positively, expressly declared that these guidelines are binding and shall be followed till the time Parliament enacts the suitable legislation with this effect. Judgment was delivered in 1997. Parliament did not find, dear friends, a time to enact the suitable legislation till the year 2013. 16 years it took. That is what our democracy is. That is what our, with great respect, due respect, cutting across the political affinity and affiliations, our elected representatives are. And that is what the real concern to women is about. Till the time when Act was enacted in 2013, Sexual Harassment Prevention Act, those guidelines were made as binding. Supreme Court, in absence of any such law, invoking international law, the other side, other effect of that, workplace. Otherwise, rather freedom from sexual harassment was read as a right to life guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. As we know that Article 21 of the Constitution provides that no person shall be deprived from his right to life and liberty, personal liberty, except according to procedure established by law. Wherein freedom from sexual harassment was read as a part and parcel of right to life. Right to life with human dignity. That's what the preamble says, assuring the dignity of individuals. Fraternity, assuring the dignity of individual, that is the sole center point of the notion of gender justice, of the notion of feminine jurisprudence. Now it has altered the whole canvas of the notion of or concept of fundamental rights. Otherwise, traditionally, in an orthodox manner, fundamental rights are available only against the state. What about the workplaces which are not within the meaning of Article 12, which are not the state? Whether those guidelines laid down by the Supreme Court were also binding? If yes, then the effect would be, it means even Article 21, which is a fundamental right, is also applicable to not only state, but even the private parties, private persons. Answer to this, as a student of law, is yes. The whole canvas of, whole gamut of, whole issue of fundamental rights, whole notion of fundamental rights have been altered by way of one stroke of decision delivered by the Supreme Court. And it was not the first occasion, even thereafter also. If you read Shubhra Chakrabarti, if you read Chandrima Das, Chairman Railway Board versus Chandrima Das, the notion of fundamental right, particularly Shubhra Chakrabarti. It was Article 21 was invoked against quote unquote husband. We know husband is not the state. Husband cannot be a state, so called. And that's why the notion of gender justice, which has been reflected there. Lastly, I would refer one judgment and then I will conclude. Recent trends and gender justice. Joseph Shine. 497. Section 497, criminal law experts are here. They might throw some light upon this. Section 497, which has made adultery as an offense. Yusuf Abdul Aziz, Samitri, Revati, there were the judgments up. Woman is protected. Woman cannot be earlier till then be prosecuted. Rather, last sentence of section 497 is that even the party or a woman who is a party to the offense cannot be prosecuted even as an abettor. Primarily, apparently, it looks like that a protection extended 15.3 rather justified. Till then, the judgments, Yusuf Abdul Aziz, Saumitri, Revati, they justified 497 as a protection on the basis of Article 15, Clause 3, which has empowered the state to enact special laws for women. However, feminists attacked it. 497 is nothing but treating woman as subordinate one, treating woman as a property one, treating woman as cattle. She can't do anything. She has no right even to prosecute. Not only that, there are several such connotations which are associated attached to it. Only married women. What about unmarried? What about divorcees? What about widows? When we talk about equality, gender justice, feminism, what about this? That's why I think there are several judgments delivered. Justice Deepak Mishra probably in his judgment said, since it is not applicable to unmarried women or widows or divorcees, that is nothing but the romantic paternalism. It paternalizes romanticism. Right, wrong, that is for you to discuss, that is for you to decide, that is for you to debate, come to the conclusion. And that's why in Shani Joseph, when you talk about gender justice, when you talk about equality, then it shall be similarity. Whether it is right or wrong, again I would say, whether it is right or wrong, that apart. And that's why in Shani Joseph, 15.3 was not accepted. Reasoning employed till then by the previous decision, right from Yusuf Abdul Aziz till Saumitri Revati, that reasoning was not accepted, and as it was held to do the gender justice to the gender. Dear friends, herein what we need is that when we talk about women's empowerment, when we talk about gender justice, when we talk about the recent trends in the constitution vis-a-vis gender justice, other issue is about female feticide. How come? Are we really proud of our own culture? I am also Indian, I am also a citizen, I am also a member of this liberal civilized society, as you are. How come if it is a female fetus, well-educated women tend to remove that female fetus? Every state, including Karnataka, Maharashtra, 65,000 such cases in a year. Imagine the quantum. I will just share one instance. If you happen to watch Amir Khan's program Satyameva Jayate, 2-3 years before it was to be telecasted, one of the episode was devoted to PCP Act, wherein lady, a medical doctor, mother-in-law, a medical doctor, father-in-law, a medical doctor, husband is a medical doctor, whole family is of medical doctor, a profession, medical profession. That lady doctor happened to give birth to a girl child, which was not liked by mother-in-law. She started abusing, troubling, torturing her daughter-in-law. Both are doctors. She narrated this whole instance. And what mother-in-law must have done, what that grandmother must have done, that she took that baby girl in a pram and kicked out from 3rd or 4th floor so that that girl child would be killed. Now, dear friends, whatever is provided under the Constitution by way of justice, by way of liberty, by way of equality, by way of fraternity, by way of assuring the dignity of individuals, Where is that? We have fundamental rights guaranteed under Article 21 including, but at the same time we have duties also. Article 51A, particularly H, abjure from violence, refrain from violence. Those duties are also equally fundamental. Do we know? Do we follow? Where is our conscience? What she has done, what the mother-in-law has done, what the grandmother has done, I think even animals would not do. Where is our conscience? As the 5 core parameters were laid down by the successful democracy by Dr. Ambedkar. Two amongst them, existence of public conscience, observance of constitutional morality, existence of public conscience. Do we have a conscience? Are we first and foremost to ask ourselves, are we human beings? Animals would not do. Constitution is there. Laws are there. Judiciary is there. Supreme Court is there. Police machinery, administration is there. Equality before law and administration is one of the parameters. Constitutional morality is one of the parameters. Public conscience is one of the parameters for the successful, civilized, democratic society. Whether we have lost our conscience or we don't possess any conscience, human conscience at all. What kind of dignity do we talk about? What kind of justice do we talk about? We are failing not in our duty, we are failing in our conscience. That's why I call upon all of you, including myself, I am no way exception too, that deliberations, discussions about any issues shall not be confined only about the deliberations, discussions. Those values, constitutional basic values, basic human values are to be imbibed by each one of us amongst us. And not only to be imbibed, are to be adhered to stricto sensu, are to be observed in a stricto sensu. Then only there would be a peace in this society. Then only there would be a prosperity in society. Then only there would be a justice, a gender justice in this society. Till then, otherwise these academic exercises would remain academic and would cease to have any kind of effect, any kind of impact. Our energy, time, money, everything would be wasted and go into the dustbin as such. Hence, it is my humble appeal to all of you. It is my humble request to all of you. Please, you are young, prospective wives and husbands, prospective mothers, fathers, prospective mother-in-laws, prospective grandmother-in-laws. Think over this. This is the time. Aim of any educational institution, I believe in, is not only to teach the legal syllabus, law syllabus, but if possible, to inculcate, if at all, certain basic human values. Then only such exercise would be meaningful, useful, fruitful. With this, I thank once again to Professor Subramania and management for inviting me, giving me an opportunity to share a few thoughts with you as well as all my colleagues and to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us on the importance of the preamble and what each principle enshrined stands for also throwing light upon gender justice, how dialogue on the same is the need of the hour, striving for complete justice. Thank you, sir.